Hey, I'm Sam, and this is my dad Joe, and over the past few weeks you've watched us turn a pile of pre-cut lumber into a 12x12 shed. Last week I showed you how I spray insulated the inside of the shed and closed up the walls. Today we're taking the final steps in transforming this 12x12 shed into a fully functioning workshop as I show you how I installed my barnwood backdrop and added the finishing touches. Throughout this series, it has been my goal to show you that you can also create your very own workshop in your backyard. Welcome to the final episode of my Shed Shop series. This series is sponsored by the Home Depot, and this episode is sponsored by Plank & Mill. If you guys are new to this series and would like to see how we got to this point in the process, you can go ahead and click on my Shed Shop playlist on my YouTube channel to check out the previous build episodes. This week we are focusing on adding the finishing touches to my walls, and I knew from the beginning that I would love to have this barnwood backdrop in my workshop to add a really awesome photo backdrop for my videos and for my blog posts. So to help make my vision come to life, Plank & Mill provided me with 3-inch wide peel and stick reclaimed barnwood boards to add to my workshop. As soon as I opened one package, I knew I wanted to get started, so I began by piling everything into a corner of my shop and allowing the boards to acclimate to the environment for about 48 hours prior to installing them. Each bundle came with boards that range from 1 to 4 feet in length, as well as an instruction manual. Once the boards were acclimated to the space, getting started was such an easy process, and it couldn't have gotten any easier for installation as well, which made me so happy because this build was so stressful that it was nice to have a project that was really easy and straightforward. So once I figured out where I wanted my boards to be, I peeled away the plastic from the adhesive backing, and I just applied it to the wall with my level and made sure that everything was nice and straight. Once it was in place, I then applied pressure to the board and it stuck to the plywood like magic.
Wait, like seriously, that's it? Alright, I'll take it.
Once the first row was in place and level, I then began to add the second row, making any cuts and any marks that I needed to based on where the boards fell. For my specific project and to help make the process faster, any cuts that I needed to make were made on my miter saw, but you do not need a miter saw to cut these boards, and I'll show you another trick in a little bit. Once my cuts were made, I just repeated the process all over again by peeling the plastic away from the adhesive backing, applying the board to the wall, and then adding some pressure. When applying the second row, I actually did use my level to make sure that everything looked good, but after the second row was complete, I kind of tossed the level away because at that point everything was pretty straight. Next is where things got a little tricky. So I had these outlets on my wall and I had to make marks and notches in my boards to make sure that they would fit around the outlets. So to do that, I just marked out a rough outline of where the outlet fell on the board when I laid it out on the wall, and then I took measurements of the height and the width of the outlets and then transferred that to the board using a straight edge and a tape measure. As soon as I was happy with my markings, I just added a piece of scrap plywood underneath the board and then began to cut away the marking using a razor blade. And the only reason I put the plywood underneath the piece was to not ruin my brand new workbenches. And to be quite honest, the razor method took a little longer, but it actually worked really well. So if you don't have a miter saw, this is definitely a great method for you. After cutting for a little bit, I was able to bend and move the piece that I wanted to take away from the board, and I just kind of flipped it over and used the razor blade one more time to make that process easier. Once I was able to get that notch out, I then fit it to the outlet and it fit perfectly. One other area of this build that was a little tricky was the area surrounding my window because I did have a windowsill that I needed to notch out as well. So essentially I just used the same exact method that I used for the outlets at this point in time. I marked my cuts, I made little notches using the razor blade, and then actually after installing the piece, I then notched away the actual piece for the windowsill and carried a little handsaw with me just in case I needed to make adjustments, but it worked well without the saw. After getting the windows and the outlets out of the way, it was pretty much smooth sailing for the rest of the process. In terms of the method to my madness, there really wasn't one. I just kind of added boards in a random pattern because I wanted it to look really organic. In all honesty, I really did find that having a miter saw made this build a lot quicker, so if you have access to a miter saw, I would highly recommend using it if you're doing a project like this. The other thing that I found out kind of the hard way was that it was a little difficult at first to get the plastic away from the adhesive backing, so after a couple of boards and some practice, I kind of figured out a little method of just pinching the corner and grabbing from there, and everything kind of went well after that. This probably sounds so stupid, but it actually blew my mind how easy this process was. I was actually able to get both sides of my workshop done within a couple of hours after my full-time job, and it was just such a breath of relief to be able to do a project in this space that felt like it wasn't stressful or crazy time consuming, and in the end, I was really happy with the impact it made. Once I got to the bottom of the wall, rather than trimming the pieces on my table saw, I actually used a little trick where I peeled away the adhesive backing and just added one board to the bottom to look like a baseboard. Once the baseboard was installed, I kind of just went back and used a brad nailer to just nail in any pieces that I felt like were sticking out a little bit. It wasn't a lot of them, but it was a couple, and this method really helped. I also used some of the excess boards to create framing for some of the other outlets and the portions of the window that were not involved in the full wall itself. After finishing up the walls, it was time to hang all of my tools and add a fun little chalkboard wall to the entryway of the shop. And that's when I was finally able to see my vision come to life right in front of my eyes. It's really hard to explain the feeling of just pride and joy and accomplishment that just came over me when I was able to put my tools into this shop and have them have a permanent space. In my last shop, I was really unable to have all of my tools live in the same place, and I often had to bring them outside in order to do projects. Even the fact that I can have a table saw in this shop that I do not need to fold up or bring outside every time I want to use is seriously blowing my mind. Building this shed shop was the hardest project I've ever done in my life, and it was this moment right here that made it all worth it. Not only do I have a space that I can build in, but it is a space that looks gorgeous and one that I can use as a backdrop for many of my future blog posts and videos. Throughout this entire build, there was one thing that continued to ring true, and that is without your love, support, and your encouragement, that my business and my blog and this entire build would not have been possible. So in all of this, I just want to thank you all so much for being awesome, and I can't wait to share the amazing projects that come out of my new shed shop. Until next time, friends, happy DIYing.